What the rebel Atlanteans realized was that in order to defeat the gods, they needed to psychically summon a superorganism from depths that would truly be unfathomable. Anything that they could wrap their minds around or control would be something that could also be comprehended, anticipated, contained, and controlled by their adversaries. So these titans summoned something Typhonian, uncontrollable and incomprehensible, to rise up from the depths and break the walls of their prison. It did not just come through those vortices in the ocean of its own accord. The thing was invited. The octopuses, who are from that same more complex biosphere of Earth's future, just came along for the ride. In the Sumerian language from the time of the Anunnaki, Cthulhu means underworld man. The rebel Atlanteans became underworld men and women when they called this shape-shifting Cthulhu from the future, from the place, Topos, that they were denied by a false utopia defined by the perennial past. Herein lies the crux of the adversarial relationship between the trickster and the Nordic time travelers. The latter are attempting to fortify fixed structures of human society which they claim to be the achievement of perfection, where in fact they have outlived their functioning period. Everything of this kind, that in a vampiric manner is trying to hang on past its time, and way past its prime, is targeted by the superorganism from the future. Fort sees himself as the thing's prophet, quote, an organism. It is a thinkable-sized formation. Affairs upon the earth, this earth, are fluttering upon the edge of a new era, and I give expression to coming thoughts of that era. Thousands of other minds are changing, unquote. Changing how? Are we dealing with an invasion of the body snatchers here, or mutations that engender the X-Men? The Nordics have clearly convinced themselves that it is the former scenario. The jigsaw precision of their interlocking megalithic stones can be deciphered psychoanalytically as an attempt to ensure that there are no cracks in their totalitarian society through which the ectoplasm of this thing can ooze into our world to remake our bodies by reshaping our minds. If we were to let it in, it would deconstruct not just our society, but our sense of self on a fundamental level. We would find that we have no absolute and inviolable core of selfhood, and that instead our persona is constituted by more or less cooperatively cohering or antagonistically coexisting selves. These have established a modus vivendi, maybe one enduring for many lifetimes, before reincarnating as separate individuals, just as perhaps at one point they may have been the souls of different people who merged to constitute one's self. The horror would not just be psychological, it would be ontological or cosmic. Ultimately, it would require the realization that reality is radically relational, like the Brooklyn Bridge, over which Linda Corteil was abducted. Nothing final can be found in all the bridge because the bridge itself is not a final thing in itself, but is a relationship between Manhattan and Brooklyn. In other words, if our existence is a relationship between the positive absolute and the negative absolute, the quest for finality in it is hopeless. Everything in it must be relative if the whole is not a whole but is itself a relation. The quasi-Aristotelian logic that still defines the thought patterns of the breakaway civilization would have to be abandoned in favor of a more paradoxical thinking, one wherein everything that is also isn't, and the answer to every question is yes and no. We can either make this evolutionary leap, or we'll all go back to savagery again in a powerful backward slide, because the trickster has had it with the sterility of a time-traveling society that has reached an evolutionary dead end. She-He is from the future that is being denied by these undead overlords, and She-He wants to live. Whether it can coexist with humanity depends on whether humanity can change, but also on whether the shape-shifting trickster can take a shape that is constructive for the long-term transformative development of humanity. As Christopher O'Brien puts it in his study of tricksters, when needed, they are willing to alter and sometimes even change the very nature of Gaia itself. But, in general, they are here to break down outmoded structures and dissolve order into chaos so they can introduce elements of novelty and change into a particular cultural belief system. So the trickster is a deconstructive force that aims to catalyze novel development or innovation by providing a degree of chaos requisite for the reemergence of order in a new and more dynamic form. O'Brien continues, often, trickster behavior appears on the surface to be amoral, nonsensical, and bewildering, but this appears to be an integral part of some sort of calculated agenda. The apparent amorality of these boundary pushers who defy convention comes from the fact that they use secrecy, thievery, and cunning to accomplish their goals. There are many forms of the trickster, from clowns and fools in folk culture to shamanic animals like the coyote and raven in American Indian culture, or the African spider god Anansi and the Norse god Loki. But there is one god above all, or rather one titan, who epitomizes all of the characteristics of the trickster in a manner that is most conducive to human empowerment, the evolution of our consciousness, and innovative development, Prometheus. By contrast with Carl Jung, who still considered Christ as the Ion, albeit in the vein of Valentinian Gnosticism, the Jungian mythologist Karl Karenyi recognizes that Prometheus is the more primordial Ion savior figure that is functionally equivalent to Christ, and that was overwritten by Christianity. Except that, despite his intention to present Prometheus as nothing less than an archetypal image of human existence, Karenyi does not have the guts or the spine to face the fact that, even if there is an apparent functional equivalence on the relatively abstract level of archetypal psychology, the trickster Prometheus is a mediator between the human and divine orders in a far more powerful, integral, and coherent manner than Jesus Christ. As we saw above, the latter was at best a schizophrenic and at worst an agent tasked with promulgating cognitive dissonance. He was crucified willingly only because he knew that he would be resurrected by his daddy 3 days later, the same sadistic godfather whose genocidal mania and arbitrarily tyrannical decrees fill the Old Testament. By contrast, every act of trickery that Prometheus engages in on behalf of humanity, from the theft of fire to the undermining of sacrifice to the gods, is undertaken with a willingness to endure a punishment worse than death. Prometheus is the archetypal image of a humanity that has adopted as its slogan the battle cry of the American Revolution: "Give me liberty or give me death." Actually, give me worse than death. Let me burn in hell forever and ever, rather than submit to a capricious and rapacious overlord. The future belongs only to individuals with this kind of ethos. The challenge that faces us is to establish a kind of communication and communion with the trickster that is involved in the close encounter phenomenon, by means of which we would be able to seduce this shapeshifter into emanating in a Promethean form that becomes the Ion of this aeon. In order to differentiate this Ion from the Greek mythological figure of Prometheus, which would have to be retrospectively seen as an avatar of this Ion, I propose that we refer to her/him as Promethea. This name, which is equivalent to the Greek word for forethought, which is the defining quality of Prometheus, also calls to mind the NIDS scientist's description of the trickster at Skinwalker Ranch as a precognitive sentient phenomenon, PSP. The survival of something like humanity, albeit in a dramatically changed form, depends on our being able to coax the trickster into becoming our Prometheon. We need to choose the form of the destructor wisely, very wisely, as the Ghostbusters understood, and to choose it with a sense of humor commensurate to engagement with the trickster. At the same time, we need to be prepared for an evolutionary leap. A deep study of the close encounter phenomenon will bring one to the conclusion that the hybridization project is being run not by the gray androids of the Nordics, but by those other so-called grays who sometimes manifest as owls, and who are also seen together with the mantid forms projected by the trickster. I have already suggested as much in my remarks above regarding the case of David Huggins. So much depends on what we decide will be the fate of these strange wizened children who, with their pointy chins, large almond eyes, and wispy platinum hair, look like creatures from Japanese anime. They are not alien infiltrators, as David Jacobs and other simpletons suspect. These freaks, these artificial mutants, are heralds of the future evolution of humanity. The amniotic fluid in which these children grew was the ectoplasm that eventually did find its way through cracks in the cyclopean, megalithic masonry of the gods. Each and every one of them is either a canary in a coal mine or a harbinger of a new world. If we allow harm to come to these children, who are born blameless, then their mother will not confront us as Prometheon. She will take a far more destructive form, and you can rest assured that nothing whatsoever of the human race will survive her undying rage. For now we enter the twilight of the gods, and Loki's wolf is loose upon this world.